Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. If you're foliar feeding your crop or thinking about foliar feeding your crop soon, one of the questions that you should be asking yourself is, what is my water quality and what can I do to ensure those products work better? We'll discuss this today.
We're also going to talk a little about cover crops. Now, cover crops have been incredibly popular here over the last few years, but should they fit on your farm? Will they fit on your farm or not? We'll talk about it on today's show.
Well, one of the great things about cover crops is if you've got one established, it could shade out our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed a little bit later in the show, but first, here's our farm basics.
Stop losing money from your stored grain with the End-Zone Fan Control System from Farm Shop MFG. Hot spots and moisture in your bin can cost you thousands in lost revenue. The End-Zone monitors outside conditions to run your fans exactly when you want them to, naturally bringing your grain to ideal temperature and humidity. Master bin management with the End-Zone. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about variable rate fertilizer and how farmers use that in their operations.
One of the great things about technology in agriculture is it has allowed us to see how variable our fields are. Now, you may have the same soil type across the field. It's been handled exactly the same over the years. But when the yield monitor shows you've got 200 bushel corn in parts of the field and 100 bushel corn in other parts of the field, putting out the same amount of nutrition just doesn't make sense.
Well, quite frankly, I don't care as much about what the soil type is, but I do care about exactly what Darren was talking about there, what ultimately is the yield potential. And the whole thing is, if you hear in the media about farmers misusing fertilizer, I just always think that's a bunch of nonsense. When was the last time you ran into a farmer who wanted to waste money? No way! Farmers are the most conservative people there are, I think. So every farmer is trying to figure out, how can I spend as little as possible on fertility yet maximize my yields? So now what many farmers are doing is they are soil testing in all different areas in the field to figure out how much do they need in each spot in that field for fertilizer, and then when they apply that, as they go through the field, the machine has what we would call a script, or basically a prescription, so it will vary the rates of fertilizer that's applied as you cross the field.
Well, it all starts with that good soil testing program. And this is something, whether you've got a farm or you've got a garden or a yard, whatever, you can do this soil testing wherever you're at and feed whatever you're trying to grow the same way that farmers are doing. So you want to take a 6-inch soil core and you'll pull about a quart's worth of soil from a relatively small area. And then if you've got a great big field, you'll want to do that every so often, like many farmers will do every 1 acre, which is about the size of a football field, as they head across their farm. Pull those soil samples and look at all the nutrients out there that your crop will need to grow. So not just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but also the secondary and micronutrients as well.
Someday my dream is we could just cross the field with a machine that would sense what we have for nutrients in the soil already and we apply based on that. But we don't have that kind of technology today. What we do have is soil testing. And so we do various soil tests throughout the field to figure out where exactly do we need to put our fertilizer, and then we apply it at differing rates, and we call that variable rate fertilizer.
Well, one other thing that may vary as you travel across fields is weed pressure. If you've got our weed of the week, we'll show you how to get it under control later in the show.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and micros, and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With Decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soil and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more about Decomp at eggbio.solutions.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Pentair Hypro 3D nozzles are your premier choice for fungicide applications. Syngenta fungicide application field trials have shown Hypro 3D nozzles provide a yield advantage of up to 10% over other nozzles, maximizing the return on your fungicide investment. Learn more at pentair.com/hypro.
How much money are you leaving in the bin? If you want the most profit from your stored grain, you need the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. This low-cost bin monitoring solution tracks temperature and humidity and gets your grain in ideal condition. And with deep preseason discounts on all Grain Temp Guard units, now is the best time to upgrade. Don't leave your money out in the bin. Get the most from your grain. Order today at farmshopmfg.com.
Foliar feeding has become incredibly popular on a lot of different crops. But what we wanted to really talk about today is not just foliar feeding, but what kind of carrier are you using? What is your water quality like, and how does that impact your foliar fertilizer?
Oftentimes when we talk about water and we visit with other farmers, they're like, well, do you mean 5 gallons an acre, 10 gallons an acre? No, what is your water source? And this could be well water, it could be rural water, it could be city water. There's a lot of different places that you could get this water from. The question that I have though is, have you tested the water? And if so, what did you learn? When you look at water quality, like on our own farm, for example, comparing well water to rural water, there's a huge difference and we need to manage that accordingly.
Okay, here are the 3 main things that we're really after. Number 1 is water pH. Number 2, hard water ions, and number 3, chlorine. Let me just start with the pH. With a lot of the foliar fertilizers, we have found that if we get the pH too high, we don't seem to get the same intake into that plant. In other words, I'd really like to see that water pH down in the 5, 6, 6.5 kind of range. Sometimes, well, really, quite frankly, most of the time we find in our region of the country, in the Midwestern United States, the water pH is high just coming out of the well, 7, 7.5, maybe more. So water pH is number 1.
Well, when you look at the water quality, the other thing, as Brian already mentioned, is hardness of the water and what other nutrients are in there. For example, calcium, magnesium, and iron. These are things in our well water and in many samples that we've looked at from across the country. We see a lot of those nutrients out there. And those nutrients have strong positive charges that could impact the chemistry that you're applying it with. Oftentimes that calcium, magnesium, iron, those hard water ions can bind up things like glyphosate, for example, and there's been a lot of focus on making chemistry work. The same thing can happen as you're trying to foliar apply fertilizers. You can have a chemical reaction happening in your tank, not a dangerous chemical reaction, but one in where the nutrients you're trying to apply could get tied up by those hard water ions.
Okay, the third thing is chlorine. Now, the number 1 factor with the chlorine is it raises the pH. Yes, the chlorine and treated water, when you have that, you're typically going to see fewer hard water ions, but when you have a much higher pH, that is a big problem. For chlorinated water in our area, we typically see 8.5 pH, sometimes even 9 pH, so that's a real problem. The other thing is the chlorine will kill off any beneficial microbes that you are trying to spray at the same time. So quite commonly now, we will see people putting foliar fertilizer out along with plant growth hormones and some beneficial microbiology. So you may call that biologicals, naturals, whatever it is. But many times those are all getting applied in that tank. Well, the chlorine's going to kill those beneficial microbes, and the chlorine's going to raise the pH. So we want to neutralize that or not use water that has chlorine in it.
So there are many different solutions to these problems that we're outlining here, but here's what we would suggest you look at. Products that you could add to your spray tank that would tie up the hard water ions and tie up that chlorine moving them into forms that we can actually spray out onto our field. Obviously, you could use some sort of filtration system and completely take those things out. The challenge with that is, as farmers, we're using a lot of volume of water. Just imagine if you're spraying 1,000 acres at 10 gallons of water per acre, well, that's 10,000 gallons of water. If you're going to run through a reverse osmosis system or something like that, it's a lot of volume and you'd need a big expensive system to do that. However, if you could just add something, especially at low rates, to your spray tank to tie up those unwanted things, and you could spray them out without having a whole bunch of waste that you have to discharge somewhere, that's a very beneficial system and something that could work well for your farm.
Okay, so let's start with neutralizing the hard water ions. There are many different products out there that can do this. The one we're using on our farm is called water-rite, and it only costs a few cents per acre. So we're not talking about a lot of money. In addition to neutralizing calcium, magnesium, iron, and copper, what it will also do is drop the pH almost immediately down around 5.5 or 6. So that is ideal. That solves 2 of our problems. The other problem is the chlorine that you may have in your water. Now, if you have that, there's another product we've been using called BioPrep. That only costs maybe 2, 3, 4 cents per acre. It's almost nothing, but what it does is it turns the chlorine into chloride. So all of a sudden, it's a beneficial nutrient that you're putting out there, and it's not going to kill any beneficial microbes that you may be spraying as well.
There are a couple of products we get a lot of questions about: ammonium sulfate and citric acid, where farmers have been using relatively low rates of those 2 products to try to lower water pH. What we've seen is in many of the commercial water sources, like rural water or municipal water, they've got some products already in the water to help buffer things. So as you make additives to them, they just buffer those additives and take some of the impact of those products away. Like ammonium sulfate, for example, many of the tests that we've run show that we can lower water pH, but that it eventually comes back up. It's not a lasting change. With citric acid, one of the problems that we've seen is farmers are using various rates and trying to figure out exactly how much to use. Well, we could lower that water pH way too far, and that could create a detrimental situation with the products that you're trying to spray. So they're a little bit more difficult to utilize and oftentimes less predictable.
So before you go doing some foliar feeding on your farm, we really encourage you test your water. Look for chlorine, look for hard water ions, including calcium, magnesium, iron, and copper, and then also take a look at what the pH is. Ideally, we would like to have no chlorine in there, or at least in the chloride form. We'd like to have very few hard water ions, and we'd like that water pH to be somewhere in the 5.5 to 6.5 range for best results with a lot of the foliar fertilizers that we've seen on the market today.
Yes, there are a few steps to doing this correctly if you want your foliar fertilizer to work. There are also a few steps that we'd like to see you take if you want to control our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Where we have run the Soil Warrior, we have harvested the best corn we have ever harvested in the history of Wrenwood Farms. Now, I'm kind of always wanting to push the envelope to see what else I can do to help enhance that emergence. Their ride is so much smoother. Their seed placement is even better. Where we had our best emergence and we've had our best yields, which was where we ran the Soil Warrior.
Introducing the all-new Diamant Cornhead from Capello, USA. With a revolutionary design highly innovative for its class, we have painstakingly designed every component down to the smallest detail to maximize your harvest efficiency. This gives you unprecedented standards in operation and performance. For more information about this beast, available only in our new gray poly, call 855-CAPELLO or visit capellousa.com to find a dealer near you. Capello, wherever you are, we are.
Find love, then give it all away. find love, then give it all away.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Darren and I have gotten a tremendous amount of questions about cover crops here in the last few years. We want to talk about that as we head into the cover crop seeding season this summer.
Let's talk about prevent plant first of all, because we saw a lot of situations in 2019 where fields couldn't get planted. And in quite a few of those cases, farmers were able to get a cover crop in later in the season. So we're really excited to see in 2020, now that those fields, many of those fields anyway, got planted to crops like corn and soybeans, how are they going to respond where we had a cover crop versus where we didn't? What we've seen over the years and what we've heard from other farmers who regularly plant cover crops, they see higher yields, they see more productivity due to better soil health by having that cover crop out in the field, and they really prefer to have a crop growing in the field as much as they possibly can throughout the entire season.
Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit about the higher yields thing. We don't always see that. But the main reasons why we do like cover crops out there, first for me is weed suppression. Then I look at soil erosion. We can reduce soil erosion. Building soil organic matter is really important. And one of the biggest things coming out of Prevent Plant is just to get a home for beneficial microbes in the soil. If you have nothing growing on that field all summer long, you're more likely to have fallow syndrome next year, which means you didn't have enough mycorrhiza fungi living through this year, so next year you could have ample nutrients available. So there are a lot of good things that can come out of cover crops, but Darren mentioned this higher yields thing. I don't buy that, and here's the reason why. In some areas, absolutely. And I'm not saying don't plant a cover crop. I want you to plant a cover crop. But here is the problem that I saw this spring. There were some guys that let their cover crop grow through the winter, causing a couple of issues. Number one is the soil remained wet. Well, if you're in North Dakota, you don't want that soil wet when it comes April 15th and it's time to plant. That delayed planting for some guys, which will push yields down. The other thing is, in terms of just having that cover crop out there, in drier areas, you can actually get moisture sucked up by the cover crop early in the spring or late in the fall, and now you've got a soil that is too dry. So personally, if I'm in, let's say, North Dakota or just the western corn belt in general, I'm probably going to suggest terminating that cover crop prior to freeze up in the fall to make sure we know that it's 100% dead so we can go into the spring with a good, fresh, clean start.
All right, let's take another situation. We talked about prevent plant a little bit. Let's talk about if you've got a crop that's going to be harvested in the summer. For many growers, that means wheat. Well, after a wheat crop, do you still have enough year left to raise another cash crop, or is a cover crop a better option on your farm?
Where we're going with this is cover crops are good for overall soil health and the reasons I mentioned earlier. But let's keep in mind, you're not going to get any income off that. Now, if you graze it, then that's not a cover crop anymore. That is a cash crop. If you harvest it, that is a cash crop. If there's something you can do so you can generate income off that, that's got to be the first goal. So what Darren's going for here is don't just assume, hey, we're just going to throw a cover crop in and the rest of the season's dead. Well, maybe you have time to grow something yet where you could get some income off it somehow, some way, whether it's for livestock, grain, seed, whatever it is.
All right, we mentioned having enough season left to raise a crop, but do you have enough season left to raise a cover crop? And this one is pretty interesting, depending on where you're at, to think about, because if you've got a lot of warm weather yet and you have some moisture coming to get that cover crop started, you don't need a whole lot of time for that cover crop to provide some benefit. Now, if you've got 60 days, well, that's plenty almost anywhere you go with just about any kind of cover crop. With some cover crops, if your goal is just to stop erosion and get something growing out there, you can use even less time with certain species.
Okay, in terms of cost, we would tell you don't spend more than 15 or 20 bucks on your cover crop. In terms of blend, we really do like blends. So personally, if I'm going to raise a cover crop, I'm probably going to have a grass, a broadleaf, maybe a turnip radish, something like that. I'd like to get a few different things out there. The only big exception would be if I'm trying to break a disease cycle or an insect or mite cycle, then I might have to leave out a certain species. But make sure you have something that will host mycorrhiza fungi moving forward, and make sure that the cover crop will help you achieve what your #1 goal is, whether that's building organic matter, reducing soil erosion, stopping weeds, whatever it is.
We think cover crops are useful for many purposes on the farm. We're big fans of cover crop. Just take a look at how much season you have left. If there is a cash crop option for you where you can actually make some money, great. If not, a cover crop could be the next best thing.
If you go to our resources tab at the agphd.com website, we do have some more information about cover crops for you there. And when you're on the Ag PhD site, you might find some information about our Weed of the Week as well. We'll tell you what it is coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our Weed of the Week is Swamp Smartweed.
It is a difficult to control weed in the fact that it's a perennial weed. Now, it looks a lot like Pennsylvania smartweed or lady's thumb smartweed, except for the fact that it's really hairy. That's going to be the real telltale sign above ground, and of course if you try to pull it up, it's going to have rhizomes beneath the ground, so you know that tillage is probably not a good option, and also many of the contact above ground herbicides are not going to be great. You're going to need something that moves systemically down into the roots.
All right, here's the other thing. The name is Swamp Smartweed. So where do you think this grows? It's going to grow where you don't have good crop canopy. It's going to grow where you have a little bit wetter conditions. So solve that problem. Get some tile out there, improve the drainage, raise a great crop, and the crop will usually choke out Swamp Smartweed fairly well because Swamp Smartweed doesn't get tall, it stays fairly close to the ground. All right, so Darren, what do you think in terms of weed control in corn? What are your best bets pre and post?
Well, my best bet is to use Roundup, and in any situation. Now, if you've got it growing in an area where you've got desirable grass, well, that's kind of a tough situation. I want to get the drainage done, and I want to spray some Roundup on top of that Swamp Smartweed. Out in crop, you can burn it back with some of the post treatments. Maybe you'd use Verdict, so you've got some sharpen in there pre.
I'd use Verdict pre.
Post-emerge status.
Yep.
Soybeans, boy, nothing's great other than having Roundup in the burn down, and then post-emerge more Roundup. And in wheat, we don't normally see Swamp Smartweed out in wheat fields. The 2,4-D component in some of these mixes can help you. I prefer just a Roundup burn down with a very strong rate of Roundup. That's the best bet.
Okay, non-crop ground, again, improve the drainage. Dicamba, 2,4-D, usually you're just going to be burning it to the ground. That's okay. If you burn it to the ground year after year, eventually it will go away.
That's all the time we have for this week's Weed Swamp Smartweed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
It's no secret that Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with your schedule. Field conditions in recent years kept many from timely planting and fertilizing, and when you can't get your fertilizer applied, you lose thousands of dollars in yield potential. If you need flexibility in your fertility application timing, you need a drop tube system from C&R Supply. C&R drop tubes allow you to apply liquid nitrogen in season and place it exactly where your crop needs it. To learn more about low-cost C&R drop tube solutions, visit crsupply.com.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. and use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
Challenging field conditions often make harvest difficult. Can your corn head handle it? The GTS X10 corn head from Agra US is a rugged, cost-effective alternative to heavier, more traditional heads. Constructed of durable yet lightweight aluminum, the X10 puts less strain on your combine without losing harvest effectiveness. And it is 40% lighter than traditional heads, reducing field compaction in those less than ideal conditions. For more information, give us a call at 8334 Agra US.
Find love, and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
Stop losing money from your stored grain with the End Zone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. Hot spots and moisture in your bin can cost you thousands in lost revenue. The End Zone monitors outside conditions to run your fans exactly when you want them to, naturally bringing your grain to ideal temperature and humidity. Master bin management with the End Zone. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Brian and I talk a lot about how we often mix several products together as we're spraying crop protection products. I want to make sure that you don't have problems at home if you try this on your farm. There are a lot of new products that come out each year, and as you know, I like to try the new things. However, I don't want to have problems in the spray tank. The best ways to avoid this fate are, number one, to ask questions of suppliers and manufacturers. They've often tried mixing their products with a bunch of different things during the developmental stages of the product, and if they know for sure something doesn't mix, well, they can save you a lot of trouble. The second way to avoid trouble is by doing a simple jar test. Mix the various things you plan to tank mix in a clear jar in the order that you'll mix them. For example, let's say that you want to mix some fertilizer with another fertilizer and some water. I always like to add the water first, as it seems to minimize some of the problems later on. Then add the two fertilizer products one at a time. Shake the jar vigorously to see if any problem arises, and then add the second product and follow the same procedure. Watch for a few things. If the jar gets warm, there may have been a chemical reaction taking place in the jar that could adversely affect the products that you're putting together. Also, watch for clumping or settling out of solid particles. Now, if you don't see any adverse reactions at first, you should be in good shape to mix those products in your big tanks. Also, we use a compatibility agent called Convert. Try that in your jar test as well to see if it helps. We've definitely seen the tank clean out become much easier when we use Convert too. One last note that's especially related to fertilizer products is there's a lot of foliar fertilizer going out now. Each batch of fertilizer may be different, so if you get another load of fertilizer delivered to your farm, it's a good idea to jar test things again. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but before we go, we want to invite you to check out the Ag PhD radio show, where we take your live phone calls each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on SiriusXM Channel 147.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.